You think you know the story of Oz. You're wrong. What you've been told is a lie, carefully constructed to hide something far more sinister. Behind the colorful facade lies a nightmare that will shatter everything you believed about this beloved tale. The Scarecrow underwent systematic mental lobotomy, his mind harvested for the elite. The Tin Man's flesh was slowly carved away until only screaming metal remained. The Lion's soul was murdered, his natural leadership destroyed through calculated psychological torture. The Wizard sits on a throne built from human suffering, a master manipulator who feeds on broken minds and shattered spirits. Dorothy isn't a hero. She's a child victim of the most sophisticated mind rape ever conceived, systematically conditioned into perfect slavery. Each character represents a different method of human destruction, a blueprint for breaking the human spirit so completely that victims thank their tormentors. This isn't a children's story. It's a manual for psychological warfare, hidden in plain sight for over a century. Chapter 1. The Scarecrow's Lobotomy, Harvesting Minds for the Elite. In the 1890s, America witnessed the systematic mental conditioning of an entire population. The Scarecrow wasn't seeking brains. He embodied what happens when people are deliberately made to doubt their own intelligence, their own worth, their own ability to think independently. Farmers weren't just struggling financially, they were being psychologically destroyed. Political cartoons depicted them as literal scarecrows, stuffed with straw instead of brains, easily manipulated puppets dancing to their financial master's tune. This wasn't accidental mockery. It was calculated psychological warfare designed to make farmers believe they were inherently stupid. The truly horrifying part wasn't being called brainless. It was that they began believing it. Generation after generation started internalizing the message that thinking was for other people, that questioning authority was beyond their capabilities. The Scarecrow's quest becomes a nightmare when you realize it represents millions who had their confidence systematically stripped away. If you can convince someone they lack intelligence, you don't need chains to control them. They'll put the chains on themselves. The Scarecrow spends the entire journey believing he's the dumbest member of the group, despite consistently solving their problems and demonstrating actual intelligence. But because he's been told he's stupid, he can't see his own capabilities. This psychological conditioning became a blueprint for controlling entire populations. Tell people they're too stupid to understand economics, politics, or their own rights. Convince them that thinking is dangerous, that questioning authority is beyond their intellectual capacity. Make them believe intelligence is something only the elite possess, something that must be granted rather than developed. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just changing how people worked, it was changing how they thought about themselves. Factory owners didn't want workers who questioned, who innovated, who thought critically about their conditions. They wanted human scarecrows, stuffed with just enough knowledge to perform tasks, but convinced they were too intellectually inferior to demand better treatment. The Scarecrow's brain, when finally received from the Wizard, isn't actually a brain at all. It's bran, pins, and needles. Sharp objects designed to cause pain whenever he tries to think too deeply. This isn't liberation, it's a more sophisticated form of control. Now he has permission to think, but only thoughts that cause discomfort, only ideas that remind him of his artificial nature. Educational systems were designed not to develop critical thinking, but to create compliant workers who would never question the systems that exploited them. The Scarecrow represents every person told they're not smart enough to understand their own oppression. Every worker convinced they're too stupid to question unfair wages. Every citizen told they're too ignorant to participate in democracy. When the Scarecrow finally realizes he's been intelligent all along, it's not a happy revelation. It's a horrifying recognition of how much time was lost, how many opportunities were missed, how much suffering could have been avoided if he had simply trusted his own mind from the beginning. The psychological conditioning that created the Scarecrow continues today. People are still being told they're too stupid to understand complex issues, too ignorant to make important decisions, too intellectually inferior to question authority. The methods have evolved, but the goal remains the same: create a population of human scarecrows who believe they need permission to think. Chapter 2: The Tin Man's Flesh Prison, When Humanity Dies Screaming. Nick Chopper didn't lose his humanity in a single moment. He lost it piece by piece, cut by cut, in a process so gradual that he didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. This wasn't an accident. It was a curse designed to transform a living human being into a hollow shell of metal, incapable of love, empathy, or genuine human connection. The Wicked Witch of the East didn't simply want to prevent Nick from marrying her servant. She wanted to demonstrate the complete destruction of human essence through systematic physical and psychological torture. Every swing of his enchanted axe didn't just remove a limb, it removed a piece of his soul, his identity, his very humanity. Imagine the horror of that first cut. Nick raises his axe to chop wood, as he had done thousands of times before, but this time the blade turns against him, severing his leg. Worse than the physical agony was the psychological trauma of being betrayed by his own tools, his own hands, his own body. The tinsmith who rebuilt Nick's leg wasn't performing kindness. He was participating in systematic transformation designed to strip away every trace of humanity. Each replacement part was perfectly functional, but completely devoid of the biological essence that made Nick human. His new tin leg could walk, but it couldn't feel grass beneath its step or warmth from fire. With each replacement, Nick became more efficient as a worker, but less capable of human connection. The psychological horror cannot be overstated. Nick was conscious through every amputation, every replacement, every step in his journey from man to machine. He watched his own body disappear piece by piece, felt his capacity for physical sensation diminish, experienced the gradual death of everything that made him human. By the time the witch's curse claimed his torso, arms, and legs, Nick had become something unprecedented, a fully conscious being trapped in a mechanical body, capable of movement and thought, but incapable of the physical sensations that connect us to our humanity. He could see his beloved but couldn't feel her touch. He could speak of love, but couldn't feel his heart race with excitement. The final amputation was the most cruel. When the cursed axe took Nick's head, it removed not just his ability to feel physical sensation, but his very identity. The tinsmith replaced his head with a perfect tin replica, complete with speaking mechanisms and optical sensors, but the brain inside was no longer organic. It was a mechanical approximation of thought, capable of memory and reasoning, but incapable of emotional depths that make consciousness meaningful. What emerged was a perfect worker, tireless, efficient, uncomplaining, and completely incapable of the human connections that might interfere with productivity. Nick Chopper the Man was dead, replaced by the Tin Man, a mechanical being who retained memories but had lost his capacity for genuine human experience. The Industrial Revolution was creating real-world versions of Nick Chopper's transformation. Factory workers were losing limbs to dangerous machinery, only to be fitted with crude prosthetics and sent back to work. Workers were being systematically dehumanized, treated as interchangeable parts in industrial machines, valued only for their productivity and discarded when they could no longer perform. The Tin Man's quest for a heart represents the ultimate tragedy of industrial dehumanization. He knows something is missing. He can feel the absence of what once made him human, but he doesn't understand that what he's lost can never be truly replaced. The heart the wizard gives him is just another mechanical part, a silk bag filled with sawdust that simulates the weight and shape of a heart but lacks its essential function. The real horror isn't that he lost his heart. It's that he accepted his transformation as inevitable. He never questioned why the curse happened, never sought to reverse it, never raged against the witch who destroyed his humanity. Instead, he adapted to his mechanical existence and sought validation from the very system that had dehumanized him. Nick Chopper's transformation represents every worker convinced that their value lies only in their productivity, every person taught to suppress their emotions in service of efficiency, every individual who has traded their humanity for the promise of security in a system that views them as replaceable parts. Chapter 3. The Lion's Soul Murder, Breaking the Beast Within. The cowardly lion wasn't born afraid. Lions are apex predators, natural leaders, instinctively brave and confident. For a lion to become cowardly, something catastrophic must have happened, something so psychologically devastating that it reversed millions of years of evolutionary programming and turned a king into a cowering servant. William Jennings Bryan, the man many believe inspired the Cowardly Lion, was once a formidable political force. Known as the Great Commoner, he commanded audiences with his powerful voice and passionate speeches, defending the working class against predatory banking elite. His famous Cross of Gold speech at the 1896 Democratic National Convention was delivered with such force that it secured him the presidential nomination. But something changed. By his third presidential campaign in 1908, Bryan had become a shadow of his former self. His speeches lacked their former fire. His convictions seemed less certain. His legendary courage appeared to have abandoned him. Political cartoonists began depicting him exactly as Baum described the Cowardly Lion: all roar, no bite. What broke Bryan's spirit wasn't a single event, but a systematic campaign of psychological warfare designed to destroy his credibility and confidence. The banking elite and industrial powers he opposed didn't just attack his policies. They attacked his character, his intelligence, his very identity as a leader. They used every tool at their disposal: bribery, blackmail, character assassination, and the systematic destruction of his political allies. Every time Bryan took a strong stance, he was portrayed as extreme. Every time he showed passion, he was called unstable. Every time he demonstrated courage, he was accused of being reckless. Over time, these attacks created a psychological prison where Bryan began to doubt his own instincts, question his own judgment, and second-guess every decision. The lion's cowardice goes deeper than political manipulation. In Baum's story, the lion is afraid of everything: mice, his own shadow, even his own roar. This isn't just political timidity. This is complete psychological breakdown, the kind that results from systematic trauma designed to destroy a person's fundamental sense of self. The industrial elite had perfected techniques for breaking natural leaders. They understood that courage isn't just an individual trait, it's a social contagion. One truly brave person can inspire others to stand up, to fight back, to refuse exploitation. Therefore, courage must be systematically eliminated from potential leaders through carefully orchestrated campaigns of intimidation and humiliation. The process begins by isolating the target from their support network. Friends become unreliable, allies disappear, family members are threatened or compromised. The natural leader finds themselves alone, cut off from relationships that once provided strength and confidence. Isolation breeds doubt, doubt breeds fear, and fear breeds compliance. Next comes systematic destruction of the target's achievements and reputation. Every success is reframed as luck or fraud. Every accomplishment is minimized or attributed to others. The lion who once knew his own strength begins to question whether he was ever truly powerful at all. The final stage is the most cruel. The target is offered redemption through submission. They're told they can regain respect, security, and acceptance by abandoning their principles, betraying their followers, and serving the very system they once opposed. Many natural leaders, psychologically broken and desperate for relief, accept this devil's bargain. The Cowardly Lion's journey with Dorothy represents this final stage. He's promised courage by the wizard, the same wizard who represents the corrupt power structure that broke him. The lion doesn't seek to reclaim his natural bravery through his own efforts. He seeks permission to be brave from the very authority that destroyed his confidence. When the wizard finally grants the lion his courage, it's not courage at all. It's a medal, a symbol of external validation that the lion mistakes for internal strength. Real courage comes from within, from trusting one's own instincts and moral compass. The courage the wizard provides is dependent on external approval, making the lion even more psychologically dependent on the system that controls him. The true tragedy is that his fear is entirely artificial. He demonstrates genuine bravery throughout his journey, fighting off dangerous creatures and protecting his companions despite his terror. But because he's been conditioned to seek validation from authority rather than trust his own actions, he can't recognize his own courage when he displays it. Chapter 4. The Wizard's Blood Throne, Architect of Human Suffering. The man behind the curtain isn't a harmless trickster caught in a white lie. He's the architect of a totalitarian system so sophisticated that his subjects willingly participate in their own oppression, believing they're living in paradise while trapped in a prison of illusion and manipulation. Oscar Diggs arrived in Oz as a failed carnival performer, a man with no real power or authority. But he possessed something far more dangerous than magical abilities, a deep understanding of human psychology and the theatrical skills to exploit it. Within days, he had convinced an entire population that he was a deity deserving absolute obedience and worship. The wizard's first act wasn't to help the people of Oz, but to divide them. He created arbitrary geographical boundaries and appointed different witches to rule each region, ensuring the population would never unite against him. The wicked witches weren't his enemies. They were his enforcers, regional governors who maintained order through fear while the wizard remained above the fray. The Emerald City represents the ultimate expression of totalitarian control through manufactured reality. Every citizen is required to wear green-tinted glasses from the moment they enter the city, ostensibly to protect their eyes from brilliant emerald light. But the city isn't actually green, it's the glasses that create the illusion. The wizard has convinced an entire population to voluntarily blind themselves to reality. The green glasses serve multiple purposes. They make citizens complicit in their own deception. They create a shared delusion that bonds the population together, and they make it impossible for anyone to see the city as it really is without being immediately identified as a dissenter. Anyone who refuses to wear the glasses is instantly marked as a threat to social order. The wizard's palace is designed to inspire terror through sensory overload. Visitors are assaulted with booming voices, terrifying faces, fire, and smoke, all designed to overwhelm their rational faculties and induce psychological shock. In this state, people lose their ability to think critically and become susceptible to any suggestion or command. The most insidious aspect of the wizard's rule is how he maintains power through systematic destruction of self-reliance. Citizens aren't just forbidden from solving their own problems, they're conditioned to believe they're incapable of it. Every personal need, every desire, every aspiration must be channeled through the wizard's authority. He doesn't just control resources, he controls hope itself. The wizard's method of granting requests reveals the depth of his manipulation. He doesn't actually give the Scarecrow intelligence, the Tin Man a heart, or the Lion courage. Instead, he provides theatrical props, symbols that allow his subjects to believe they've received what they always possessed. The diploma, the testimonial, the medal, these aren't gifts, they're chains disguised as rewards. This serves a dual purpose. First, it maintains the subject's dependence on the wizard's authority for validation. Second, it ensures they'll never recognize their own inherent power because they attribute their abilities to external sources. The Scarecrow will never trust his own intelligence because he believes it came from the wizard's diploma. The wizard's background as a window dresser reveals the calculated nature of his deception. He spent years learning how to create artificial desire, how to make worthless objects appear valuable, how to manipulate human psychology through visual presentation. His rule over Oz is simply window dressing on a massive scale. The most horrifying aspect is the system's self-perpetuating nature. Citizens police each other, ensuring compliance with the green glasses mandate and reporting anyone who questions the system. Children are raised from birth to believe their glasses are necessary, that the wizard is benevolent, and that their own perceptions cannot be trusted. The wizard's surveillance network extends far beyond the Emerald City. Flying monkeys serve as a secret police, monitoring every corner of Oz for signs of dissent or rebellion. These creatures aren't just magical beings. They're the embodiment of a surveillance state where privacy doesn't exist and every citizen lives under constant observation. The monkeys report directly to the wizard, feeding him information about who speaks against his rule, who questions the system, who dares to remove their green glasses. The economic system of Oz is designed to create artificial scarcity and dependence. The wizard controls all resources, all trade, all means of production. Citizens can't grow their own food, make their own clothes, or build their own homes without his permission. This economic stranglehold ensures that rebellion isn't just psychologically difficult, it's practically impossible. Anyone who challenges the system faces not just imprisonment or death, but starvation and homelessness for their entire family. The wizard's manipulation extends to the very concept of time and memory in Oz. Citizens are encouraged to forget their lives before his rule, to believe that the current system has always existed and always will exist. History is constantly rewritten to support the wizard's narrative. Books that contradict his version of events are burned. Scholars who remember the truth are disappeared, and monuments to previous rulers are destroyed. The wizard doesn't just control the present. He controls the past and future as well. Religious worship in Oz has been perverted to serve the wizard's purposes. He's established himself not just as a political leader, but as a divine figure worthy of worship and devotion. Citizens are required to pray to him, to offer sacrifices in his honor, to teach their children that questioning the wizard is not just treason, but blasphemy. This religious dimension of his control makes resistance not just politically dangerous, but spiritually devastating for believers. When Dorothy finally pulls back the curtain, she doesn't just expose the wizard's mechanical tricks, she reveals the banality of evil itself. The man behind the spectacle isn't a monster or genius. He's a mediocre con artist who stumbled into power and became addicted to it. The wizard's response to being exposed is chilling. He doesn't apologize, doesn't show remorse, doesn't attempt to make amends. Instead, he immediately begins planning his escape, abandoning the population he's controlled for years without a thought for the chaos his departure will create. Even in defeat, the wizard demonstrates the insidious nature of his control. Dorothy and her companions don't reject his authority. They beg him to fulfill his promises. Even after seeing the truth, they still believe they need his validation to be complete. The psychological conditioning is so deep that exposure to truth doesn't break it. Chapter 5. Dorothy's Mind Rape, the child who never escaped. Dorothy's story isn't about a young girl finding her way home through courage and determination. It's about the systematic psychological conditioning of an innocent child, transforming her from a free-thinking individual into a compliant servant who willingly submits to authority and abandons her own power. The tornado that brings Dorothy to Oz is a metaphor for traumatic disruption that makes people vulnerable to psychological manipulation. When someone's entire world is turned upside down, they become desperate for stability, security, and guidance. In this vulnerable state, they're willing to accept help from anyone who appears to offer safety. Dorothy's first act in Oz isn't heroic, it's destructive. Her house crushes the Wicked Witch of the East, instantly making her responsible for someone's death. But instead of being traumatized, Dorothy is celebrated for it. The Munchkins hail her as a liberator, teaching her that violence in service of the right cause is praiseworthy. This is her first lesson in moral relativism. The silver shoes Dorothy receives aren't a gift, they're a trap. She's told they have magical power, but never taught how to use them. This creates dependency where Dorothy possesses incredible power, but remains ignorant of it, making her easy to manipulate by anyone who claims to understand her situation better than she does. The yellow brick road is the most insidious element of Dorothy's conditioning. She's told it will lead her home, but it actually leads her deeper into a system of control. The road is a physical manifestation of psychological pathways created by authority figures who convince people there's only one correct way to solve their problems. Dorothy never questions the road's direction, never considers alternatives, never wonders who built it or why. The companions Dorothy meets aren't fellow travelers. They're additional victims of the same psychological system. Each represents a different aspect of manufactured helplessness. The Scarecrow believes he lacks intelligence despite demonstrating problem-solving abilities. The Tin Man believes he lacks compassion despite showing kindness. The Lion believes he lacks courage despite protecting his companions. Dorothy's role is particularly disturbing. She becomes the enabler of their learned helplessness, constantly reinforcing their false beliefs about their inadequacies instead of helping them recognize their strengths. When the Scarecrow solves a problem, Dorothy credits it to luck. When the Tin Man shows kindness, she attributes it to temporary sentiment. When the Lion acts bravely, she dismisses it as desperation. Dorothy unknowingly becomes an agent of the very system that's manipulating her, helping to maintain her companion's psychological dependence while remaining unaware of her own conditioning. She's not just a victim, she's an unwitting collaborator in her own oppression and that of others. The wizard's treatment of Dorothy reveals the true nature of authoritarian control. He doesn't refuse her request outright, which might prompt resistance. Instead, he gives her an impossible task: kill the Wicked Witch of the West. This eliminates one of his rivals, forces Dorothy to become complicit in violence, and demonstrates that even seemingly benevolent authority figures will demand terrible sacrifices. When Dorothy succeeds in killing the witch, she's horrified by what she's done. But her companions and the wizards celebrate her actions, teaching her that her moral instincts are wrong and that authority figures are better equipped to judge right and wrong than she is. This is the moment when her moral compass is permanently damaged. The wizard's final deception is the most revealing. When he's exposed as a fraud, he doesn't lose his authority over Dorothy and her companions. Instead, they beg him to fulfill his promises anyway, demonstrating that their dependence on his validation has become so complete that even proof of his deception can't break it. Glinda's revelation that Dorothy could have gone home at any time is the final twist of the psychological knife. Dorothy learns that all her suffering, all her fear, all her desperate seeking of external help was unnecessary because she possessed the power to solve her own problem from the beginning. But instead of being angry, Dorothy accepts this revelation with gratitude. The ruby slippers represent the ultimate cruel joke in Dorothy's psychological conditioning. These shoes, which could have transported her home instantly, were kept secret from her not by accident, but by design. Glinda knew from the moment Dorothy arrived in Oz that she could leave whenever she wanted, but chose to let her suffer through the entire traumatic journey. This wasn't kindness or teaching, it was deliberate psychological torture disguised as wisdom. The phrase, "there's no place like home," becomes a brainwashing mantra, repeated until Dorothy's mind accepts it as absolute truth. But what is home for Dorothy? It's a place of poverty, isolation, and emotional neglect. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry show her no affection, no warmth, no genuine care. They treat her as a burden, an obligation they must fulfill. By convincing Dorothy that this loveless environment is home, Glinda ensures she will never seek anything better for herself. The psychological programming runs even deeper. Dorothy's entire adventure in Oz was designed to break down her natural curiosity, her desire for something more than the gray, lifeless existence she knew in Kansas. Every challenge she faced, every friend she made, every moment of joy or wonder was ultimately revealed to be meaningless, something she should abandon in favor of returning to her previous misery. This is psychological conditioning at its most sophisticated, convincing the victim that their dreams and desires are selfish fantasies that should be surrendered. The timing of Glinda's revelation is particularly cruel. She waits until Dorothy has been thoroughly traumatized, until she's killed 2 people, until she's desperate and broken, before revealing that none of it was necessary. This isn't wisdom, it's sadism. Glinda could have saved Dorothy from every moment of suffering, but chose instead to watch her endure trauma after trauma, pretending it was for her own good. Dorothy's companions become unwitting accomplices in her conditioning. Each of them represents a different aspect of learned helplessness, and Dorothy's role as their leader teaches her to accept responsibility for others while denying her own needs. She becomes so focused on helping the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion that she loses sight of her own desires and goals. This is classic codependent conditioning, training Dorothy to derive her worth from serving others rather than pursuing her own happiness. The ruby slipper's power is activated not by Dorothy's will or determination, but by a magical incantation that reinforces her dependence on external knowledge. "There's no place like home" becomes a mantra of surrender, a psychological trigger that transports her away from any possibility of recognizing her own power. Dorothy's return to Kansas isn't a homecoming, it's imprisonment. She's been psychologically conditioned to accept her powerlessness, to seek validation from authority figures, and to dismiss her own capabilities as unimportant. She's been systematically broken down and rebuilt into a compliant citizen who will never again question the systems that control her life. Dorothy represents every person convinced to abandon their dreams in favor of accepting their circumstances, every individual taught that seeking external validation is more important than trusting their own judgment, and every child whose natural curiosity and independence has been systematically destroyed by systems that profit from compliance.